Well, I wanted to ask you about a scene in Donnie Brasco that I always thought was, that it's hysterically funny but heartbreaking and kind of original in the sense that I'd never seen anything like it before. It's the therapy scene where, Joe, Donnie, played by Depp, is trying to be a good scout and go to couples therapy with his wife, who's saying he's not there for her.
Right.
But you can't. You're in a situation where you're supposed to be honest. It's supposed to be like a safe environment where you try to get help with your wife in front of a third party. And by the nature of his job, he can't tell them why he's an inaccessible husband. And it's almost like you could build a whole comedy around that premise. But was that something that you constructed from the ground up, or did Joe actually go through that with his wife?
No, that was just something that I constructed out of the humor of it, the culture clash of it. It was a situation where the vocabulary was just so different, and the lack of understanding was so profound.
Because I remember being in a theater where people, you could have been in a comedy because the audience just really got off on and Depp played it beautifully, but this kind of like slow burn as he's just got to sit there and hear about how he's not there for her, and he's not, and the shrink thinks he's just not opening up about his feelings.
Right.
But he's sworn not to. So it's a wonderful squeeze for a character you put on that scene.
Yeah, he's such a dexterous actor, and it was funny because it was a big leap to cast him at that point, because he had played Edward Scissorhands and...
No, that was the first straight leading man role he had done, if ever, but certainly in a long while, but I think if ever.
And I really think if he hadn't beaten up that hotel room, he wouldn't have gotten the part. Remember when he beat up the hotel room?
Yeah.
Everybody sort of said, oh, he's dark, he's dangerous, he can play this mafia undercover man, because within the narrative we had him beat up that pimp on like page 10,
right,
and you just sort of covered it, and then the audience, almost anything you give the audience in the first 10 minutes becomes they'll accept.
So it becomes their frame of reference.
And that becomes their frame of reference, and then after 10 minutes they won't accept anything.
Well, you're very right. That was the film where he transcended a boyish quality and really came off like a man. And even though we still call him Johnny in the credits of movies, since Brasco, he's never been thought of as like that actor with the boyish face, where he still looks like he's kind of not grown up yet. That really got him into adult roles.
Yeah, he's just I think he's the best. But what's interesting is when he plays. He kind of works by impersonation. So when he was playing a real life character, it was sort of right there for him. And he worked a lot by impersonating Joe, in the same way that the Pirates character is, I suppose, an impersonation of Keith Richard. It was right there for him, and he spent a lot of time with Joe, and that was kind of how he hooked into the character.
Has there been a screenplay that's turned out disappointingly different from the way you intended to the finished product? What's been kind of like a frustrating experience for you?
I can't say there's anything I've written that turned out not as well as I could have hoped, because I've had very good luck with directors. And the other thing that's different about what I do is, the script really has to be really good. A lot of times it doesn't turn out right because the script's not good. And in my case, if the script's not there yet, they just don't make it. So they're so difficult to get made that it actually compels me to get the script right. And then if the script's right, you usually get a good director, and then you're kind of 90% of the way there.
Do you get more turned on by the more challenging projects, or the projects that must be executed almost impeccably on the page?
It's one or the other. They're either challenging and they're really hard and you have days of despair, or they're easy and you're 2 weeks in and you're already bored and you're trying to figure out how you're going to finish this job. And I have always opted for the ones that are more challenging, where at least I know I'm going to stay interested.
You've collaborated with your wife, Kate, on several projects, several television projects. Is that copacetic? Does it produce any relationship static ever, or how's that work?
I think the thing with Katie, we've got a TV company, and we did, we are now doing House, which has been, a terrific experience and a much bigger hit than anything I've ever been involved.
Did you guys know it would kind of take off the way it did?
No, you have no idea. I mean, he was a hostile character. And you just have no idea. And we didn't come out of the box with big numbers. We came out of the box with sort of acceptable numbers. And, I do these kind of like quality films. This is just nothing I've ever experienced before.
Right.
In terms of the relationship, the biggest problem is you can't go home to your wife and say, my partner is such an asshole. And you can't go into work and say, I can't stand my wife.
Right. Do you have a system for balancing the two, the work and the relationship, so one doesn't step on the other?
We just have 3 kids, so they could care less about any of this. They, kids in a good way are bracingly narcissistic, and you have to respond to them.
Right. And
there is no bringing work home in that context.
What were the Oscar nominations like? What was that like to be nominated for your first movie and your second movie?
The second movie was a lot more fun. Because the second movie, Donnie Brasco, I knew I was not going to win. So there was absolutely no anxiety. And I had been there before, so it was just really fun.
What changed career-wise after the Oscar nominations? Like, what did it do for you in terms of just in terms of freedom of projects, or just how did things change after that?
I got tight. I don't think it was helpful.
Okay,
I think I got tight. And again, with The Good German, what's great about Steven is Steven's so loose, and Steven makes big budget movies, he makes little budget movies, and he's not wrapped up in all this stuff. He drives a Jetta, he's...
Yeah. Right, he's unaffected.
Not affected, and all that stuff can make you tight, and you forget why you're here. Why I came here was to make good movies and have some fun. And the nominations and the idea that somehow something had to be different now, nothing had to be different. And Steven kind of reintroduced me to that.
Oh, did they have a hangover effect that lasted for a while?
Yeah, I would say a long while.
Did you feel pressure that you have to get a nomination every time out?
Well, I still feel that.
Right.
Because I really feel like what else are you doing it for? If you're not going to try to make a great movie, what's the point? Because the bad movies are just as much work.
More sometimes, I guess.
And it's a lot of people. It's 100-some people who are working really long days. You want to basically be involved with something that's going to be great. It's not a perfect process. You don't know it can be, but you kind of want to aim for that. It's sort of back to when I was a critic. That product thing, I don't want to spend my life making product.
Does the discipline part of writing come easy to you? What's your process for kind of, following your own discipline to get the work done? Do you have specific goals that you set?
I just like to work a regular day. So I like to go to the office in the morning, work all day, come home at night. It does require a lot of self-discipline because there's nobody telling you, and especially in the movie business, nobody's even telling you it has to be in by a certain point. In fact, I think they'd rather you don't turn it in, because once you turn it in, then they have to make a decision.
Right, or get back to you.
Yeah, that's fraught with peril, especially with my projects.
Do you have any rules about structure when you're writing, in terms of kind of road mapping a story?
Beginning, middle, end, and...
Traditionalist.
Yeah, exactly. There is a logic to that Sid Field system where the story does have to turn at certain points. You can't have the first entire half hour and then it turns into the middle. So something has to happen before then. And so when you start to break it down, there is some logic to something happening every 15 minutes or whatever, but ideally the movie funnels down to the last scene and you're out. Mm-hmm. And I think that's different from, the whammy rule, or the way,
Right.
George Lucas's rules about screenwriting, where something has to happen every 10 minutes, which I think also is derived from television. Where in television you got to get people past the commercial.
Right.
Ideally, the entire movie funnels in a kind of a continuous arc up to that last scene, and then you're out. And certainly that's how Donnie Brasco works. After that last confrontation between them, there's almost nothing. There's Lefty, there's a very poignant scene with Lefty putting his jewelry away, but it all accelerates to that one scene. That's different than
Pre-planned, canned kind of plotting. And
yeah,
stuff.
because it's not really just that, plot point one has to get you to pinch point one. It's
Right.
really that plot point one has to somehow prepare you for the last scene. Everything's got to kind of get you to that last scene being just exploding.
Right, and it sounds like you're really following the emotional through line of the characters once you set them in motion.
The most valuable thing I did as a writer was to take an acting class. Not because I wanted to be an actor, but because I didn't understand what actors did. And once you understand what the actors are looking for, that's how you write. So they want to know the first thing they're going to say is, what's my relationship? What's my relationship? What's my objective in the scene? Do I have an activity? All the stuff. If there's not an activity in the scene, they create an activity. It's all of those things, and that the dialogue is not actually anything that matters. Because I had a Meisner class, and part of what that repeat exercise is about freeing you from.
Can you elaborate on
the
what
words.
that is?
It's where it seems foolish, but two actors sit opposite each other and they repeat back and forth the same word, and it changes at certain points, but it's basically they're just repeating to each other and behaving with each other and trying to take the other person in and be alive to the other person. And by making it into that kind of nonsense, at least this is what I got from it, was it liberated you from the dialogue. And I never write scenes that are about the dialogue, because it goes back to my feeling that people don't communicate.
Right.
Or what they say is often directly contradicted by how they're behaving.
So when it comes time to write the dialogue, what's the function or the purpose the dialogue is serving?
Again, it's two things. One is it's supposed to provide almost like the music.
Okay.
It's supposed to be like a music track. And then the spaces between the dialogue are supposed to tell you action and behavior. Because truth is in behavior.
Do you ever
We're
get
animals.
Right? That's certainly true in my case. I imagine you get a fair amount of input from the kind of actors we're talking about in terms of Johnny Depp or Demi Moore, the Ray Fiennes and the actors on Quiz Show. Have you gotten a lot of that input, and how do you deal with those kind of notes?
I stay away from them. I like them.
Do you go to the set? Are you on the set through production?
I don't go very much. Aaron Sorkin had a wonderful line about being a writer on the set, where he said that it's like being a hooker who's been fucked and been paid and is waiting around for breakfast. And that's what it feels like. I feel like there's only potential for trouble there.
Right.
The Good German shot in town, so I went once a week, and that was useful just because if I was in Steven's space, then he would talk to me about stuff that was on his mind. And that's how I would know he was thinking about revising this scene or that scene. And what was great about his process is he edits every night. So when it came time to do some rewriting on the film, I could actually look at a finished film with the scenes that were not shot, not in it.
That's great.
But it's fantastic.
Did you find that a valuable kind of?
Oh, it's incredible, because you have an intention going in, but then what ends up being alive on the film is always different. That's the idea. Otherwise people would stay home and read screenplays.
Right.
I like a really strict hierarchy where they're talking to the director.
Right.
I feel like there's only opportunity for mischief in the other scenario. So I talk to the director.
Now, you mentioned Mankiewicz kind of as your mentor. Are you mentoring anyone, or do you deal with a lot of younger screenwriters much in terms of trying to, teach or mentor anyone?
This is my shame, but I don't really. What I do is, because we have a TV company, we produce television. Right. And so I'm interacting with writers there and helping writers in the context of making a lot of money from their efforts.
Right. I imagine you deal you put a staff together and kind of deal with writers that write for your show, but also are staff writers. And
in that context, I feel like I am there is some of that kind of giving back kind of thing, where not just Joe, who did it selflessly, but I got so much out of Barry Levinson, for example. And I got so much out of Soderbergh when we did The Good German, both of whom are writers, and very good writers. And writers can be helpful to other writers in a way that almost anybody else can't be. But I've done it mostly professionally. I have done Sundance before, and I'm dying to go back there, and that's an incredibly rewarding experience.
That's the Sundance Lab you're talking about, where they take younger writers and pair them with industry professionals.
Yeah, and the lab is great because what's really great for an experienced writer is they're so much closer to the ground level and the audience because they're younger. So you see, like after Pulp Fiction, everybody's script was Quentin Tarantino. Right. And you sort of got, okay, that really
had an impact. Right.
That's what everybody's doing.
Yeah. What's the biggest hindrance, do you think, to making a good movie?
It's just amazing that a foot of film gets exposed. So the biggest hindrance, I still feel it's the thing that I felt when I came out here, which is, whatever the hindrance is, you can actually do it.
Right.
You just have to navigate it. Whatever the hindrances are, they're there. It's anything you would know.
Any business, yeah.
It's the money. It's
they don't know.
The amount of, it's the money. Right. It's the amount of money now that the movies cost.
Right.
It's the fact that they killed off all the producers. There's so few producers on the lot anymore, out of a mistaken economy, to my way of thinking, because when I started, you used to get a lot of stuff. There used to be and you'd get more strange ideas. Because you'd have some little producer who would have their passion project, which would be some arcane magazine article, which might end up being Dog Day Afternoon.
Sure.
Those are all, and if you live here, you're friends with the studio people and you understand.
Right.
Okay, every time you go out, it's $200 million.
Right.
For the negative. No wonder they're nervous.
Right.
And scared of losing their job and whatever. And no wonder all their focus in life is on that movie that costs $200 million that they can leverage into their theme parks and crap.
Right.
So that's a huge burden, but that's always been
in some form or another.
Yeah. Maybe it's worse now. It doesn't really matter because good movies are still getting made.
Yes.
People still will make good movies. There's any number of artists who are not part of that, and they have a lot of power. Movie stars particularly, who want to do good work.
Yeah.
So you can get it as long as you can get it done somehow. The biggest obstacles, is probably the audience's expectation of what a movie ends up becoming all of these things that are getting made.
Right.
I was talking to a friend of mine in New York who showed his kids The Godfather because they were finally old enough. And he said their eyes were this big because they couldn't believe that a movie could take you to those places.
Wow.
Because they have grown up with all of this pap.
Yeah.
And now it's suddenly holy shit, it could be that. Was an epiphany to them. That's probably in the long run the biggest burden, but again, that's life. You got to figure it out.
How do you deal with notes from the studio, or is that, have they gotten more voluminous, or is it always the same? In terms of your experience, is it a concentrated group of notes that just go to you when you're not working with the director, or they go to you and the director when you get them? And how do you deal with notes from the studio, or anyone really?
I feel like the two things a writer needs are a voice and to know how to address notes. And I remember when I was starting out, I didn't know how to address notes. It was more of a learned skill. The thing that's really interesting about notes, and the thing that's interesting about, everybody says, oh, the studio, they're such idiots. And I always tell people, go to a focus group. I remember we did a focus group for one of our TV projects.
Now, focus groups are the things that are at the tail end of test screenings, where they keep people back and
or go to a test screening.
Right.
So CBS does this thing with their test screenings where everybody gets like a knob.
Yeah, I was just at one.
Yeah, then you watch the thing.
Yeah, and you're behind a one-way glass.
But if you look through that one-way glass and you see who you're actually writing for as opposed to in your mind, which is, the Cinematheque,
right,
you'll never again think that the studio executive is stupid, because the studio executive is usually some guy who went to Stanford or Harvard or something, who has spent a lot of time thinking about your script and may be wrong, but not stupid. And so you really, to just dismiss those notes, you have probably the most intelligent audience you're ever going to have for your movie. Because once it goes in the theater, you're with the people through the glass.
Right.
And the most attentive, this is somebody who's getting a lot of money to pay attention, as opposed to somebody who's in the movie theater and doing this. So use that. But using it doesn't mean following everything that the notes say. And that's what's hard. I feel like it's like being a doctor. So somebody comes in, they say, my knee hurts. That could be a lot of things. And if you're stupid, you're going to say your knee doesn't hurt. And that's how people respond a lot of times to studio notes. They say, you're wrong, your knee doesn't hurt. Well, their knee hurts. But it could be that they need orthotics, it could be that they have phlebitis, it could be anything of a list of things, and then your job is to figure out, okay, what's making that knee hurt? It could be his left knee hurts because of his right hip, which in the movie term would be there's a third act problem because there's a first act problem. And the studio might be telling you fix the third act, when in fact what you need to do is fix the first act. That's where the art of responding to notes is. But the idea that these people are stupid is crazy.
Do you have any advice for younger screenwriters or screenwriters that are just starting out? If you had to say one pithy thing.
I would say one pithy thing is write for yourself. It's really, it's what you get in at the learning annex writing class, right, probably. But that's really what it is. It's hard to do, actually. Mm-hmm. Don't try to write for the marketplace. Don't write for, write something, write a movie you want to see.
Right.
And stick with it. I think things happen for me very quickly, but generally speaking, people write 8 or 10 screenplays before they can even figure their way around the corners. And so you have to really stick with it. You got to really put in 3 or 4 years of apprenticeship just to get to some basic facility with it.
Mm-hmm. Now, you mentioned East of Eden. What's the next thing you're going to go right into?
I have a pitch that I sold at Universal called Burnt Creek, which is near and dear to me, and that is an original. Mm-hmm. And it's been just a bear to get it done. Maybe because the adaptation really pens me in a certain way where I know maybe there's too many choices,
right,
for me. But I'll get it done, But I've written 3 drafts of it, and now I'm going to go do a 4th free draft to try to get it done. The Good German was a book that Section 8 bought that I adapted. That's going to finally come out now at the end of the year.
So Good German will be your next produced credit, and then East of Eden.
Yes, East of Eden I just turned in to Ron Howard. That's his passion to do the Steinbeck novel.
Right.
And knock wood, he'll do that as his next movie. He just finished the Da Vinci Code, so he's
solid.
He's now looking.
Right.
Yeah, that'll make a few dollars. And
I guess you're looking as well.
And I'm looking as well. And in the meantime, I'm going back to Burnt Creek and try to finally nail it down. And I hate surrendering to my own ineptitude. So I can either raise the white flag on that project and say I couldn't get it, or I can dig in and get it, and I'd rather do that.
Right. Well, I hope you get it. Good luck with everything. We want to thank today's subject, Paul Attanasio, for joining us. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Mike.
Oh, great man. We want to thank you for coming by as well. Please remember to check out the other great interviews in our series with industry pros. And remember, it all starts with you. The next Written By credit could be yours. I'm Mike DeLuca.